Hey folks, this is Fabrice. Today I want to compare the 3 global bonus damage stats in Ravenswatch and recommend which you should prioritize or how you should alternate between them. First, let's lay some groundwork about how damage works in Ravenswatch. If you're a longtime player of the game, you can skip ahead to the next chapter. Damage in Ravenswatch is calculated with this equation, A times B times C. A is the base damage of the ability you're using, including the extra damage you get from scaling. B is damage bonus effects, which could be from certain objects, and the global damage buff. C is the critical damage multiplier, which calculates the extra damage done on crit. Every character has a base crit chance of 5%. If an attack triggers a crit, the damage it would do is multiplied by 1.5, which is the base critical damage multiplier. Also, any surplus crit chance over 100% will be added to the crit multiplier. So if you have a 100% crit chance on an attack, 5% will roll over and the crit multiplier becomes 1.55. There's more we could dive into about this topic, but this should get you by for this video. If you're new to the game or just haven't heard about this before, I made a longer video and you can learn more about it from the link on the top right of the screen. With that context, here's how the 3 global damage stats work. Global damage increases how much every instance of damage does. Global crit chance increases how often your instance of damage crits. And global crit damage increases how much extra damage crits do. Now we've recapped how damage works in Ravenswatch, let's talk about how to compare the different damage stats. To make comparisons easier, we'll assume that each hit does 100 base damage. Instead of looking at a single hit, we calculate the average damage over 100 hits to better see how different bonuses affect damage over time. Critical hits will do more damage than regular hits, and every character has a base critical hit chance of 5%, even if no critical hit chance buff has been applied. Accordingly, in our 100 hits, 95 hits will not be critical, and 5 hits will be critical. This gives us an equation with 2 parts. The left side of the equation represents normal hits, the right side of the equation represents critical hits. As crit chance increases, we'll see fewer hits on the left side of the equation and more hits on the right side of the equation. Just as a sample of what to expect, here's what that looks like with a few different bonuses. Don't get too distracted by the numbers though, because they're pretty arbitrary. We need real in-game comparisons of crit chance and damage. We'll get into that next. Damage, crit chance, and crit damage can come from a lot of different talents and magical objects, but we want to do a head-to-head comparison of global modifiers. That means we need to isolate situations where the opportunity cost of choosing to capitalize on one of them is missing out on the others. For example, the opportunity cost of choosing Chapter on Luck from a grimoire is that you can't choose Chapter on War or Chapter on Anatomy. With that in mind, I'm going to limit our comparisons to the global damage options that come from grimoires and consumables. We also want to account for situations where the true benefit of the bonus isn't really reflected accurately until after you've gotten multiple bonuses or bonuses of differing types. For example, a single whetstone might not be as good as a silver bullet on average, but if we have 5 consumables and we mix in several 4-leaf clovers, does that outperform a similar stack of only silver bullets? The number of bonuses you can have is largely dependent on how long and how well your run goes. I'm going to consider 2 main cases, and maybe sprinkle in the math for some unusual cases at the end of the video. These cases will both be runs where you've prioritized Horn of Plenty, but the first will be at the end of Chapter 1, and the second at the end of Chapter 3. As a disclaimer, these comparisons will assume that at every consumable pickup and grimoire unlock, you are presented with a choice between all 3 damage options. That's not going to happen very often in a real run, but in our experiment, let's assume it does. Green, orange, and red grimoires offer different bonuses. Our example needs to account for these differences. For reference, here are the bonuses for green, orange, and red. Meanwhile, consumable global damage bonuses come in 3 forms: silver bullets, 4-leaf clovers, and whetstones. Something to note here is that the ratios are consistent for both these ways of getting bonuses. Both grimoires and whetstones weigh damage and crit chance at 1:1, and crit damage at about 1 damage or crit chance to 3.3 crit damage. We need to decide how many consumables and grimoires we should consider for our test. Chapter 1 usually has 2 grimoires, and in my experience, 1 green and 1 orange or red is most typical. We'll assume 1 green and 1 red. How many stacks of consumables is a little trickier, but let's say you've managed to get 3 Horns of Plenty in Chapter 1. We're also going to assume that you didn't pick Aladdin, so we don't have to think about his trade. In our alternative case at the end of Chapter 3, let's say you managed to get 5 grimoires during your run, including 3 greens, 1 orange, and 1 red. Now being honest, you're probably going to have 6 grimoires offered to you across these 3 stages, but in most runs you'll probably use a grimoire for a different buff, like Stars of Fate, so let's omit 1 to reflect a more typical case. On the Horn of Plenty side, let's say you ended up with 6 stacks. I think that's a fairly realistic number, because you'll probably get other rare items in your inventory, and you'll start investing in unlocking their super effects. Also, since you'll have finished your collection, we need to account for the super effect, which is 10 additional damage. This gives us the numbers for our two cases. Now we've sorted out the variables, we need to find the composition of grimoire and consumable choices that gives us the most damage. This would be very hard to do by hand, but fortunately we don't have to. I wrote a Python script. The way this script works is essentially by calculating every combination of consumables or grimoire choices and calculating the average damage of each, until it finds the largest average damage combination possible. Here are the results of running it with the parameters we set for our end of chapter 1 case. This illustrates a rule that I've found to be pretty consistent in my tests. For smaller numbers of buffs, damage buffs tend to outperform crit buffs. Now what about the end of chapter 3 example? When we run these numbers, we get a pretty nuanced result. We have a lot of crit buffs represented, but perhaps even more interestingly, a couple silver bullets manage to make their way into the result as well. They are in the minority, however, and the far more common result are crit modifiers, particularly from grimoires. I did a bunch more tests, including a more extreme one with an unrealistic number of grimoires, and the fascinating thing is that the algorithm almost always picks grimoire crit chance above crit damage and regular damage from grimoires, assuming that your crit chance is less than 100%. If you hit 100%, the algorithm prefers critical damage, which makes sense because at that point extra crit rolls over into the crit damage multiplier, where it's strictly worse than the comparable crit damage option. What might not be as intuitive, however, is that regular damage, which is better short term, starts to make a recovery as critical damage gets very high. Let's look at 5 more extreme examples of this behavior, this time looking only at consumables and not grimoires. These examples are mostly outside the range of what you could ever see in a game. This first case shows us that while you have 20 or less consumables, silver bullets are the best option. At 21 consumables, whetstones and 4-leaf clovers become better damage scaling. Silver bullets are still relevant, but get picked at a rate of about 1 in 7. At 50 consumables, crit chance has almost reached 100%, weakening the case to add more 4-leaf clovers. Suddenly we're seeing more silver bullets, and whetstones remain effective. At 100 consumables, the algorithm is going back and forth between whetstones and silver bullets. One more 4-leaf clover has been added since we reached 50, bringing total crit chance to 100%. We can safely assume that no more 4-leaf clovers will be picked. At 200 consumables, the pattern of whetstones and silver bullets continues. Both have added 50 stacks, meaning that they both give about the same value in terms of scaling. So now we've looked at these extreme examples, what are practical takeaways we can apply in normal runs? Picking crit chance and critical damage is an investment that takes time to pay off. If you don't have crit in your base kit and it doesn't look like you're going to have a bunch of consumables, damage may be better for your build than buying into crit. While under 100% crit, try to alternate between crit chance and crit damage. In terms of consumables, this looks like slightly more 4-leaf clovers than whetstones. Something else to keep in mind is that there are some magical objects and talents which can dramatically alter the path of your build. If you're running Beowulf with Blade Master, crit damage may be better value than regular damage or crit chance. Similarly, there are a lot of non-global damage buffs like Ace of Spades or King of Clubs which compete with global damage. Ultimately, the best build path is character kit, magical object, and talent dependent. I'm actually really impressed by this conclusion because it wasn't always this way. I've written multiple versions of this video on different balance patches, and sometimes there's a pretty clear-cut winner. That all these options have become somewhat comparable is a testament to how much work Pastec has put into the math behind the system. I gotta say, it's looking pretty good. I have more data we could analyze, but my voice is getting tired, so I'm calling it here. For your benefit, here are 2 more examples that I thought were interesting, but ultimately decided not to include. Let me know what you think of them in the comments. Like and subscribe for more, that's it, and I'm out.